Hello everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Gaming Breakdown, where we discuss video games and video game genres and give our opinions on them and run through a bunch of things about them. This is a new series I'm starting, obviously, just to see where it picks off. And yeah, we are kind of a gaming channel as well as a regular entertainment channel. So yeah, if you like this series, share it with your friends, family, coworkers, and leave a like. And yeah, let's get to it.
Horror games. It's a genre that's evolved over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. There's so many different types of horror games out there now, it's hard to believe that there were only single elements that existed. The first-person shooters were all but non-existent, and the ones that revolutionized that genre, survival horror, just how much has it changed over time? What makes it so different, and what exactly makes these games so terrifying? What is it about being scared that excites the human mind so much, and, well, why do we continuously keep doing it? There's all kinds of reasons and all kinds of explanations, of course, but needless to say, the horror genre is a genre that's never going to go anywhere. It's going to stay around for a pretty long time, and it's just going to continue to change and grow as we go along. But what exactly is a horror game? What makes up a horror game? What distinguishes a horror game between other games in similar genres? Thriller, action, drama. Just what about a horror game? What elements exist inside of it that make it terrifying for the player? We're going to go into that and explore some ideas.
What are horror video games? Well, isn't that the million-dollar question? They can be a lot of things. Either they can be upfront or they can be subtle. It's all about the fear and the drive for keeping you invested into a story, as well as trying to get you involved in scares, chills, and thrills, be it jump scares or be it surroundings or atmosphere. That's kind of the beauty about horror, is that there's really no one right way to do it. There's a lot of ways to go about it, and over the ages of the early days of video gaming to the current next gen, there have been new ways developers that try to expand upon trying to create that element of fear in a game where the player is worried, claustrophobic, or full of emotion to the point that it's just hitting you left and right, and it's pretty beautiful in that way. The idea, all in all, about horror video games is to have the player feel fear. And again, there are a lot of ways you can do that, be it trying to avoid a monster or trying to find your way out of a certain tight situation, or it can be just music cues or things like that. See, one of the things about horror games is that it doesn't always have to be about running or fighting a monster that's bigger and creepier and scarier than you are, but it can also be psychological, whereas you can be completely isolated off from the world around you and just let your imagination take control, and that in itself can be a very scary and powerful thing. Like any genre or anything out there, be it music, movies, television, video games, a genre of anything is going to expand as time goes on, be it the technology is going to get better, developers are going to have new ideas and incorporate that into the old ones. The video games and horror are no exception. They have expanded, they have grown, new ideas have come into how to instill fear into the player, just as now movies had done it with traditional monsters and classic horror movie monsters like Count Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and then as the 80s rolled over, they graduated into slasher monsters such as Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers. It was pretty much the slasher era. And then, of course, as the monsters began to become a little bit more played out, they wanted to seek out a new thrill, something that could more or less be real, psychological, if you will, and that's when we got into the demonic territory. Now everything's all about the paranormal, and what you don't see can actually be the scariest thing of all, letting your imagination once again take control and do all of the scaring for you. And horror video games have pretty much grown in the same way, whereas technology has allowed for much more scares, much more ideas, and new ways to screw with the player, and what can we say? They've done a really good job of doing it.
So, with the idea behind horror games, just what was the very first horror game? Well, according to research, Alone in the Dark, a series of survival horror video games developed by Infro Games, came out in the early 1990s and was highly influenced by the original writings of H.P. Lovecraft, although the later games in series grew from inspiration sources such as Voodoo, The Wild West, and a lot of other works by H.R. Geiger. But essentially, you play a character who is a private investigator, Edward Carnby, who goes to investigate a haunted mansion or a town that is full of undead creatures. Basically, the premise is that you are the protagonist, you are thrown into an environment, and you have to survive until the very end of the game. Some elements of the games allow you to be able to defend yourself against these creatures. Other elements decide whether or not you will be able to survive with weapons, or you just have to run and time yourself based on whatever situation is presented.
Of course, some of the earliest examples of horror video games is the classic Resident Evil series, or maybe even the Clock Tower games, where it's all about fixed camera angles, fixed certain situation, timed jump scares, or just all around isolation, putting you in an area where you have no hope and no help. Whereas how they've grown today, pretty much similar situation, but then we've also graduated into new ways of being scared. The graduation of horror had always been kind of interesting because, yeah, going back to, let's say, Resident Evil or the early Clock Tower game from the early mid-90s, where it was all about timed jump scares and locations and fixed camera angles.
There's other games like Manhunt, which was released on the same engine, as GTA. It's even in the same world, but it's like a different type of survival horror in which you actually have to fight. But, it's still a horror game, not much. But, yeah, and then you got to the rise of indie developers, like with Five Nights at Freddy's and Outlast and Slender Man and all the knockoffs that come in between, and then a bunch of other smaller titles that people don't know extremely well. And the rise of creepypastas also kind of helped spark a new set of games. SCP Containment Breach is a creepypasta technically, and the Slender Man is obviously a creepypasta. And with those, you can actually have a limitless amount of games that can come out. And there is a lot. I mean, I don't even know most of them.
What makes a good horror video game is a very subjective thing, because not everybody gets scared by the same thing. Some people are scared of monsters. Some people are scared of the psychological or thrillers. It's different for everybody. But if you're going to ask about what the fundamentals are, what can help instill fear into a player to make them seem on edge or uneasy, one key thing that I think helps that is isolation. Cutting them off from the natural world around them and putting them in an otherwise unfamiliar, unsafe, unpleasant territory with virtually no way out. Best examples are Resident Evil Revelations, where it takes place in modern era, and that's kind of the key is, well, we're in the modern era. How can you almost be isolated when we have technology left and right who can pretty much patch us through to any outside source? Revelations did it in a pretty good way, where you had problems, you were isolated on a ship that was uncharted, had no idea where it was, and that did it very well. Another game that's not classified as a horror game per se, but it does have horror elements in it because it has that still key feature, would be the classic Tomb Raider games from the mid to late 90s. Because even though Lara Croft is a badass woman, she still is in an isolated area that is uncharted, very dangerous, and she comes across some of the most dangerous monsters and beings that you could ever face. And sometimes even the musical cues in there can often instill that little bit of fear and anxiousness inside the player as they're about to explore a tomb that might make them wonder if they should be more prepared than they are. And that's what's really key, is all of these features make for a really good atmosphere. Musical cues that send little chills down your spine, dark areas, or just areas where you're unsure of yourself. But also, what also helps is making sure your character is not some badass warrior who can just pretty much be the threatening thing to everything around him. Another great example of this would be the original Devil May Cry. Now, the original Devil May Cry, for those who don't know, was built on the scraps of a Resident Evil game that eventually turned into something else. But ideas were too good, and they made Devil May Cry out of it. Devil May Cry takes place on an isolated island, isolated castle, completely scary, completely demonic. A lot of things are going on that if you were playing as an otherwise ordinary human being, you wouldn't want to be here. You'd be scared shitless. But then here comes your character, Dante, badass gunslinging, sword-wielding character, and he gets put into situations that look like they were set up for fears. Like in the very first level, there's a part where you have to look at a puppet, a mannequin, or what do they call those puppets? I'm sure somebody will tell me. But the puppet is standing there still, and he's got a key in his hand, and he's looking down, like lifeless. There's nothing on him. And there's subtle music, ambiance in the background. And you know you got to take this key. It even tells you got to take that key because you got to open a door. You know, because of horror situations, that the moment you touch that key, something creepy is going to happen. And sure enough, you take the key, nothing happens. Nothing happens. You turn around, boom, immediately, something fast flies across Dante's face, hits the wall, he turns around, the puppet is now moving. Oh, it's scary. If you were an ordinary human, if you were Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, ordinary human, very killable, you're scared. But no, here's Dante. All of a sudden, heavy metal music kicks in. Bum, ba, bum, bum. You're badass. You're tearing through these guys. See, that can break horror. As cool as that is for an action slasher, things like that break the horror element. It gives you that little bit of fear because you're uneasy and you're a little nervous about what's coming because you know the cliche. But when you've got a character that is the most badass thing in the room, what's to fear? You've got the equipment. You're the guy to take these things down. So what makes a good horror video game? Isolation, being in an uncharted area that has virtually no reason to exist, no reason why you would want to be here, you question why you're here at all, and maybe even questionable monsters, psychological issues, and also having a character that is not that good at combat. And sometimes so not good at combat that you may want to avoid combat altogether and even run away. Amnesia did a great job of this. Five Nights at Freddy's kind of forces you to have to think on your feet and be fast and avoiding the monsters. Slender Man, whether you like these games or not, they did their job and they did it well. They put you in a scary environment, they psychologically mess with you via sound cues, via darkness, letting your imagination take control, and then you've got monsters that are secretly creeping up on you. You have no idea about their origin. That's another good thing, not knowing what is going on. The more you know, the more you figure things out about your pursuer or the world around you, the less frightening it starts to become. Confusion, question, that's another thing. You want to not tell them much. You want to give them subtle clues, maybe hidden notes around. And that's what Resident Evil did really well, and Silent Hill for that matter. They left little clues, left little story snippets for you to piece together on your own. Not force-feeding it to the player, but letting them figure out on their own. Letting their imagination take turn and figure out what's going on around them in this world, or this hell. So that's kind of the beautiful thing about what makes horror. There's a lot of ways you can do it. There's a lot of ways you can do it badly. But when you do it right, oh, you know it's beautiful.
So what games have been evolutionary for its genre? Well, for starters, you have Silent Hill and Resident Evil, the third-person games that basically presented itself in a way where you were able to defend yourself against certain enemies, put in a harrowing situation where you're trapped in an environment and forced to survive until the very end while discovering the secrets that undergo what exactly happened inside this area. In Resident Evil, you're stuck in Raccoon Manor, or the mansion in the first game, and you're exposed to zombies and you're trying to figure out what happened and what's going on in Raccoon City and how this outbreak occurred. In Silent Hill, you're out looking for your daughter and you're trapped in the city called Silent Hill and you have no way to get out except to get to the very end of the game to discover where your daughter is. There's so many different elements in games where it's a series of puzzles, clues, tracking, and basically surviving against different types of enemies.
So, Silent Hill, what it did right was it used its limitations to its advantage, where it blended the environment around you with a fog that made it very seamless, and again, it's an isolated area. That was a revolutionary thing for the time because it made the game look much more realistic and alive than other games had for its time. And there's a lot of great games out there that suffered from this limitation where in the far-off distance you could clearly see the textures of the world around you kind of fading in as you get closer, whereas there's nothing. And I guess a game that's perfect for an example on this would be the original Tenchu games. Other games that are ninja-based, but still have horror elements in them because you're still a human ninja, but there's creepy demons in there sometimes, so yeah.
These elements remain the same throughout the course of different games that have evolved throughout the history of the horror genre game. There's Dead Space, which has a science fiction type horror twist. You have Outlast, which is another recent game that came out where you're stuck in an insane asylum dealing with all kinds of other creatures. And then the one game that changed everything for everyone, which was Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Originally an indie game that was released where you're put in a situation where you wake up after having induced yourself with amnesia from a concoction that you created and forcing yourself to go back and relive the memories that led you to this mansion that you are in with all the research and experiments that you had done to get to the end of the game to stop what you had initially started with the head of the manor or the owner of the manor. I'm not going to go into any details, but this was the first time, as far as I know, where it was a true survival horror game where you had no means to defend yourself. All you had was a lamp and some sanity potions to keep yourself from going crazy. Your only options when coming across monsters in the game was to run away. You had no way to defend yourself. It was run and hide and figure out the puzzles as you go and hope and pray that no monster tries to kill you as you're in the midst of figuring out these puzzles. And that's what made the horror genre for Amnesia when it came out so terrifying, because you could not fight back. With the release of Amnesia, a lot of other different games were able to be spawned from that same aspect of being unable to defend yourself. Eventually, over time, the horror genre has changed to the point where there are now even indie games that have now created an occult legend for themselves, namely the Five Nights at Freddy's series, where all kinds of backstories and all kinds of legends and theories have been developed as a result from this very simplistic horror game where you have no means to defend yourself except with doors and lights and timing.
Moving onward to another revolutionary game that I think people will probably recognize is Dead Space for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The interesting thing about Dead Space is that it had the action elements all there. You were kind of a badass human being, but you're still human. I guess that's key, because if you're human, you're still killable. But it isolated you in outer space, which not many games have done, or at the very least we can say done particularly well. It gave you brand new monsters that were creepy as all hell. The game would set you up with areas where you're looking off in the distance and you can see these necromorphs doing their scary things, only for them to come bursting in your room, and then all hell breaks loose. Either you live or you die. It's all up to you. Another horror game that I think was revolutionary for its time, and again, not many have touched on it since then, was Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, which was a psychological horror game that not only messed with the characters in-game, but kind of broke the fourth wall a bit and messed with the player themselves by creeping them out about whether or not the game was acting up, such as horror moments where the game announces that it's destroyed your memory card data, or just random things happen in the game that don't make any sense, and that messes with your psyche because you don't know if it's physically happening, or if you're really dying, or if you're in danger, or if it's just the character's sanity messing with the player itself. That's another way that I think was really clever in revolutionizing the horror to take it to new heights.
In my opinion, games that have been very revolutionary are, I'd have to say, the Five Nights at Freddy's series. And before you rip my head off, you have to understand that even though at this point, with the introduction of Five Nights at Freddy's World, for some reason, when it first started, it actually was kind of a very scary game. I mean, as you've heard probably before, you know, the fact that you can't go anywhere kind of brings on a very, very scary set of elements, and you can't see, you can only see through the cameras or directly out your door. You can't do anything about it except shut the door, which eats up power, so there's like that internal struggle. And essentially, though, it's like it was scary. Now, they did do that for the other, 3 games that came out, but it started to get overplayed. And also, what was also interesting is the plot, nobody really cared about the popular Slender Man game's lore. It was extremely popular, but only because it was just a new thing with the creepypasta that had come out. The whole history of creepypasta, that's for another video, by the way. But essentially, that's kind of how it went, with Slender Man. There was no lore to be explored. There was a little backstory, but no one really cared about the game's backstory because there was already creepypasta based out of it. And, no one Five Nights at Freddy's really had like enough mystery elements in it for you to really wonder what's going on. I mean, look at the Game Theorists. That's basically how they built like 2 million of their 5 million subscribers through Five Nights at Freddy's alone. I can guarantee it. And honestly, the lore is interesting to go. Even though at this point right now, it's now kind of getting overplayed and it's losing interest. For its time, it did create, a very interesting concept. And also keep in mind that whenever something popular starts creating knockoffs, you can tell it's basically become slightly revolutionary. Now, do I think that it's still the best game ever? Well, no. But, hey.
With all the different changes and elements of video games, especially in the horror genre, well, what else can be done? What aspect of horror games could be phased out, and what new ones can be implemented to make the games better? What have we not done in the horror genre that we would like to see? Well, personally, jump scares need to be completely phased out of the games. That doesn't really give you enough time to fully immerse yourself in the story when there are constant jump scares thrown about you at every twist and turn just to get a cheap scare out of the person playing the game. To me, that ruins the experience, and it doesn't really put a sense of dread on the player. To me, true fear is being able to be put in a situation, a seemingly hopeless situation, and then going from there and deciding what factors and what variables need to be utilized in order for you to escape the situation that you are in. What about the game could help you defeat whatever enemy that you're dealing with at that particular time? You can't concentrate on stuff like that when you're dealing with jump scares. So jump scares, 1 or 2, okay, fine, but not a constant barrage of jump scares, because at that moment, all you're doing is setting the player to be on a constant adrenaline high, and that doesn't give them time to really focus and enjoy the story and enjoy the world that they are being immersed into. So the thing that could be phased out, in my opinion, as far as the horror games in the future, are cheap jump scares. Unless that is the point of the game, don't put that into the game at all. It's unnecessary. You can create fear and anxiety inside of a person playing the game without having to pull out those cheap scare tactics.
There's nothing particularly that needs to be phased out in terms of horror games or horror anything, because anything can still work. Everything that has been displayed in horror has worked for reasons. Now, some things you might want to tone down, which is ludicrous jump scares that have no rhyme or reason or are just there just to be there to get a quick startle out of the player and think that that's satisfactory, when a lot of other players that are into horror really don't want to just be jump scared to death. They want to feel the atmosphere. They want to feel worried. They want to know if the character is going to make it through this nightmare. Because there's more to horror than just being jump scared by something that pops out on the screen, or even at the end of a movie that pops out on the screen in the end, just one more for the road. It's about atmosphere. There's a balance.
In my opinion, I'd like to see a horror aspect brought to video games that are not horror based. I want to see that in open world games like GTA and let's actually talk about the GTA one. So imagine you're like just doing your own normal thing, driving around in a car you stole, and you drive into the woods, and then like some out of nowhere some guy pulls up behind you, and he doesn't like shoot you with a gun. He like legitimately starts trying to slash you, and it's like, what's going on, man? Why is he trying to kill me? And it's kind of the way I want it to be, where there's like an enemy in the game, but he's not like a main enemy. He's not like party to the plot. Like if you just played the game's plot, you would probably never see him. But essentially though, he'd kind of be like, he like saw you somewhere and he wants to like kill you, and like he would stalk you. Like there would be times where you'd just be walking down the street and he'd be driving past and you'd see him and you can't catch him. He's not like superhuman or anything, but you just like, you see him sometimes, but it's not like a constant thing. It's not like every few minutes you see him. It's just like once in a while he pops up and you're around. Sometimes he'll call your phone with weird noises. Sometimes he'll actually like stage an attack on you or something. Essentially though, that it's kind of unsettling, because even though it's not a main party to the story, you still think about him sometimes, because you never know when he's going to pop up, and he's so randomly generated. And he's also not particular to the storyline. It's just like, who actually knows. And that's just something I'd like to see in like a GTA game, not through a mod. Just like somebody who like wants to kill you, but also spends most of the game stalking you, but it's randomly generated and it's not part of the plot at all. Honestly, I feel like these types of open world games. Now, before you hate on me, back in the day when I used to play this little game, Minecraft, the idea that there might be this thing called Herobrine was actually kind of interesting. Like, you never know when it's going to pop up. Now, of course, I don't play the game anymore, so, it's not much of a thing I need to think about. But honestly, I think open world games would benefit from a little somebody stalking you and either trying to kill you or trying to be malicious against you, but he's not party to the plot. That is necessary. He cannot be part of the plot.
To me, the best horror game out there will always have to be probably Amnesia: The Dark Descent, simply because it was the first time you were put in a situation where you had no means to fight back. You were facing against a horrible group of enemies that were out there to kill you and could do some serious damage to you. You were forced to hide. You weren't able to really put your mind around the whole situation, and it enveloped into a great story where you, the player, had to discover just what it was that you had done that had led you up to the point where you had to induce yourself into amnesia and figure out just what it was you had done. And the horrors that are revealed, not just with the monsters, but with what Daniel himself had done with this person who was involved in the manor and the creation of these things, leads you, the protagonist, to finally realize not only the error of your ways, but how to fix the wrongs that you had done to make up and atone for your sins. And to me, that's the best way to close out a story. That's the best way to close out a game. And there hasn't been a game like that in a very long time. I haven't played Soma yet, which is also by the developers of Amnesia: The Dark Descent, so I'm really looking forward to it and seeing what all it entails.
One of my all-time favorite horror franchises, and for great reasons, would have to be the early Silent Hill games, because they were not only developed by Team Silent people who definitely knew what they were doing before New Blood got a hold of the franchises and didn't know what they were doing, but the way they presented their series was something that was unheard of at the time, at least for electronic gaming. And in recent years, everybody is familiar with the famous PT, which translated to playable teaser for Silent Hills, which was being developed by Hideo Kojima, Guillermo del Toro, and was going to star Norman Reedus as the main character. When that game hit the PlayStation 4 demo, everybody was on top of it, everybody was playing it, and by God, it was the scariest thing ever. So out of all of them, I'd have to say PT's demo was probably my favorite, just because it did such an outrageously great job. It was by far the most real looking, which, hey, if you got realism in your game, that makes it all the more scary, because this stuff can happen if you put it in a realistic setting. You had a monster, you had no idea what was going on. It was just insanely well done. I don't think I need to really even tell you much about PT for you to know what it's about. In fact, there's not much to tell. You're just wandering around in one simple, straight, narrow-down hallway, and every time you go through one room to the next, the hallway starts to change a little bit. Things start happening. You start noticing little things that start to make you nervous. The radio is going off, telling you gruesome stories about murder. You're starting to see imagery that you definitely didn't see before. And little by little, it starts to amp up and get a little worse every time. And sometimes it even exercises restraint and holds back a little bit until it finally hits you with that one jump scare, but it was earned. Because you knew it was inevitably coming. You didn't come out of nowhere. It was earned. You were waiting for this thing to happen. You didn't know when it was coming, but you knew it was coming, and it was earned when it happened. It got you, and it got you good, and you laughed after it got you, and you were proud, and you were just clapping like, that was a good one. It's a real shame that PT was inevitably canceled, and we all know why, Konami. But we can only hope that now, with Hideo Kojima being with Sony, in contact with Guillermo del Toro, maybe they can get Norman Reedus back. They can do their own thing again, maybe make their own brand new PT game that's not related to Silent Hills, but maybe create a brand new horror game. That would be amazing. But yes, if you haven't played PT, definitely check it out. It is one of the most psychological horror demos that you will ever play, and it's definitely impacted a lot of players out there, because there are gamers around that are indie developing that are trying to recapture that same feeling, that PT game, and make their own games in that first-person view. So definitely check them out if you can.
In my opinion, I'd have to say that the best horror game is SCP Containment Breach. Now, you probably know about that. It's a very popular creepypasta kind of thing, but it's also got their own website. It's a big lore. But the atmosphere in that game is probably the best ever, because here's the thing. Everything there is like, most things there are randomly generated, and you never know, like that thing, the SCP-173, is not the scariest aspect, but the scary aspect is when it happens, because that's what SCP Containment Breach does, is that you're gonna die if you play the game. Like, you're gonna die. That's like, it's impossible to not die. In fact, there's some elements of the story that need to progress in order for you to get attacked or killed. You know? And that's just how it goes, and that's why the game is so well done with atmosphere. You know, it's not like perfectly graphic, but if you think about it, it's like you never know when something's gonna pop up. There's so many, I mean, there's certain areas, but certain SCPs, like I think his name is 196 or 096, and 173, like, you never know when they're coming. You never know when they're gonna be like, a boo, and like snap your neck or chase you around. Like, it's different. Like with Outlast, is another game I really like. You know, it was well done, but it was a very linear path. You know, it wasn't exactly open world. Now, not to say that SCP Containment Breach is open world, but you can go whenever you want, wherever you want. There's a place to get out. However, it's not like you have to follow a set path, and there's not a whole lot of scripted events. It's mostly just randomly generated stuff. So with Outlast, it's creepy, but if you play it a couple times, you know where all the jump scares are. And there's not really anything that's, like, shocking, you know? But with SCP Containment Breach, you can play it 1,000 times, and there's, like, 1,000 different ways that you could get killed, and you will get killed. And honestly, that's what's creepy. That's why I like it so much. It's the atmosphere of the game that keeps you, like, in suspense. There's no, like, calm period. There's always something that could pop up anywhere, at any time, at any place. It's not even a joke. It will happen no matter what. And that's why I like that game so much.
So, what do you guys think? What do you think is the best horror game? What things in horror games could be changed? What are the best elements that have been implemented? And just what do you think about the horror genre in general? Give us your opinions in the comments and let us know what you think, as well as what you think our next topic should be about. And until next time, see you guys.
Well, guys, thank you for watching this episode. I'm glad you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, drop a like, share this video, and yeah, and also, if you can, please go check out Eden and the Brotherhood of Gaming. They are very good YouTubers who are very good at what they do, and honestly, they deserve a lot more subs than what they have. They obviously have many more than I do. I can't guarantee for sure that they'll be in the next episode, but I can guarantee that there'll at least be two or more people in the next episode that do know a lot about video games. Could be those two, could be literally anybody else. That's my plan for the show. But please go check out those people. Links are in the description. I'll put annotations for desktop users. And also, please subscribe for more episodes, and please subscribe for other gaming content and other satirical skits and stuff. Anyway, guys, thank you. See ya.
Yo.